You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host as always. And as promised, we have Mike McGowan, Executive Director of the HIA, back in the studio to give us an update on what is going on in our construction market. Are we starting to close the gap on our critical undersupply of new builds? Where are the traders at? How's the innovation looking? And what's the state of play with regards to NCC costs and policies? Are we going to get some reprieve in that side going forward? All these questions I've got, and this is the man to ask. Mike, thanks for coming in again, mate.
Thanks, Trent. Great to be here.
Let's start off with some stats, if you can, straight off the bat. What's going on with our approvals and completion numbers right now on quarterly bases? Are we getting anywhere near where we want to be? Maybe I should ask the first question, where do we want to be? What do we think is actually an acceptable amount that we know we can handle, that we have a capacity for, that actually is going to move the dial per quarter? Do we know what that is?
I think under the 1.2 million homes framework, that number's around 26,000 dwellings a year. I would say we're, from an industry perspective, somewhere between 22 and 24,000 dwellings a year consistently is about where our 10 to 15-year average is. And I would say if we can keep it around that space, it creates an environment where there's some consistency, where employers and manufacturers can start to invest in the future, knowing that we're going to have a consistent volume of home comes through, rather than this overshooting that we've done in the past that generally leads to a downturn where we go 30,000 in 2015 down to 10,000 in 2019. So I think consistency is what industry is after, and I think we get that at around the 22 to 24,000 home mark.
Okay, so first question, 26,000, that's obviously 6,500 a quarter. Is that enough to bridge the gap? We had Jeremy Carlino in here a few weeks ago now, suggesting that we have a 50,000 home deficit that is obviously been building every year. So is 26,000 a year even enough for starters?
2 years ago, it was aspirational. I think it's realistic now that we can get to that many. Is it going to be enough? I think there's so many factors that go into it. It's probably not in the short to immediate term, but in the long term, if we overshoot that mark, as I said, we probably miss the chance to be consistent, and we probably see a downturn on the other side.
Disincentivizes the market when you okay. So long term 26 indexing up for population obviously is where we want to be, but there's an understanding and appreciation from the industry that we have a huge deficit, and 26 isn't actually probably fixing the issue short term anyway. And 22 to 24 is probably what's more realistic for what we can be aiming for, because my understanding is from conversations we've had in the past and the data that your team pushes out, we've really only been managing like 16,000 a year for most of the last half a decade, and we just hit 20,000-ish, was it? Where have we been?
Yeah, December quarter data came out a couple of weeks ago, and we had 5,500 completions for the quarter, which took us to 20,000 dwelling completions for 2024, which is about 20% up on where we were the previous year. And as you touched on there, there's been this slow increment from that average of around 15,000 homes.
So that's the most we've built since COVID in a year?
Yeah, in 8 or 9 years, even pre-COVID, it's the most we've built, probably since 2016 when we were coming off the highs of that last peak.
I think pre-COVID, you could argue that the market wasn't incentivized to build more than what it built, and that's why, which is what led to the trade base diminishing to such a small level, which is what has led to the issue for why we can't build more than 20,000 homes up till today, even though there has been an incentive and a demand.
Not to go too far back in history, but if we had our time again, probably 2017, 2018, when we were starting to trend down, we needed to find a way to keep building at around 17 to 18,000 homes a year, whether that's state-sponsored, increase in social housing program. We've seen such an acceleration over the course of the last 5 years from such a low, which was market failure, that it's been really hard to get back to a point where we've reached that consistency, which I think is why industry is looking for a period of certainty now.
Okay, so do we expect our numbers to keep tracking at above the 5,000 a quarter? How are the approvals and completions looking in the pipeline? Because I know that when we were looking at it a year ago, it wasn't likely. It wasn't happening. The approvals were starting to trickle in, but the completions certainly were lagging.
We saw 19,000 commencements in the 2024 period, and certainly that's been really consistent over the last 2 to 3 quarters. I think a lot of that's been driven by some of that early investor activity that we saw at the beginning of 2024. and the back end of 2023. So that's hit construction times, and we're starting to see a lot of those dwellings completed in the outer suburbs as well. Demand for building is still incredibly strong. My builders are consistently telling me how full the books are at the moment, and that there's a really strong pipeline of work coming through. There was some perhaps cooling towards the back end of last year, but it's certainly come back again this year. It's probably some constraints around land and skilled labour that probably are restricting the volume of sales that we're seeing. But again, it's at that 19 to 20,000 mark.
Can I posit also that it's affordability? My feedback on the ground and my experience on the ground developing property every day is that there certainly was a cool down from, I'd say, October to December last year, and that led to seeing some increase in stock on the market broadly, which has actually dissipated back the other way in the last 4 months. But certainly October to December nearly was a standstill in the house and land market after such a really big, strong first 9 months of that year. And I would posit that it was actually the continual increase in the cost of construction and nearly a logjam in the price of the land, with land developers not wanting to drop their prices suddenly, being the reason that a lot of people just weren't able to actually stack up the servicing for a house and land package. Think about it, Mike. 6 years ago, you're getting a house and land package for 400 grand. Now it's 800 grand. And really anything below 800 grand people can afford. And above 800 grand, it's just not happening. So we're seeing more and more people push to these 325 square metre blocks on the fringes of Perth just because that's the only thing that stacks up. I'd actually suggest that's the thing that has been holding us back, is people just being able to afford to build a new home.
I think so. And I think in some respects we were a little bit lucky that the investor market stepped in the back end of 23 and 24 to take up the slack when we were seeing some of those challenges in affordability. I think the purchaser now has changed in that market, and that cool off, it's definitely been a structural change in our market in regards to affordability. And I think the $750,000 limit for the first home buyers grant, which has not only a $10,000 bonus for those going into that market, but obviously some stamp duty concessions as well, is that we're reaching that threshold for that market as well.
That limit is becoming an issue, but it doesn't seem like the sort of thing that we want to keep pushing out, but it seems a thing politically that happens. If you want to get more houses on the ground, you have to increase the limit, and these packages keep getting more and more expensive. Otherwise, no one's going to build anything.
Yeah, I think we need to unpack why those things continue to increase in costs, and part of those are government fees and charges and holding costs. Some of those are understandably the price of materials that's accelerated over the course of the last 5 years, and some of that is down to labour as well. I think some of that will start to normalise a little bit over the next few years as we see some consistent volume. We'll still see CPI-style increases in a lot of that product coming through, and there's a lot of impact on material costs with energy prices on the East Coast as well. I think we'll see some plateau. We certainly won't see the acceleration in those prices that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, but I don't think it's going to get any cheaper soon.
Well, that speaks to a stat you gave us maybe a year and a half ago, a couple of episodes ago that we'd spoken. I think it was something like 2/4 ever in the last 40 years that the cost of housing has actually gone down. So anyone expecting it to go down, when you say normalise, it doesn't mean drop. It means stabilise and only go up a little bit every quarter.
I think the adage of the best time to build was yesterday and the next best time is today is certainly relevant in the current market. And with lots of challenges in global logistics, with our skilled trade challenges that we're having at the moment, that supply and demand just means that we're going to continue to see the prices of housing increasing.
So this is the new norm for prices. If you want to build a standard family home, it's probably starting with a 4 these days rather than a 1 when I built my first home and a 2 just before COVID. And is there a new norm in build time frames as well? I remember before COVID, and you were telling me your family home was built in 7 months. That was a standard back then. You could build a single-story family home in 7 months. Double brick, everything you needed. The average time now is what?
It's around 11 months.
Which is better than what it was 2 years ago.
Fantastic, yeah. I think we were probably closer to 18 months was the normal experience. And as we've read, and as a lot of people would have experienced, many people had a lot longer than that.
Should we expect it to go any faster? Is it getting better, or are we stabilising at a new norm?
I think we've found an element of stabilisation, but builders are still trying to build as fast as they can. So
it's in their interest.
It's in the builders' best interests to get projects completed as quickly as they can. It's ultimately down to the scheduling and availability of materials and trades that can help get that project completed as quickly as possible. But I certainly know of instances at the moment where there is pockets of high trade availability that the builders are completing jobs in that 7 to 8 month mark. And there's ones that are in the outer suburbs where maybe trade availability is a little bit low that might take a little bit longer. But certainly the anecdotal feedback that we're getting from our volume builder members is that your standard 3x2, 4x2 project home is from contract signing to key handover around that 11-month mark.
I think it's acceptable to the market, but I'm sure everyone would like it to be faster like it used to be, because if we could do it in 7 months back then, why can't we now? And obviously what that 7 months represents is not a lot of downtime, and 11 months means 4 months worth of nobody on site.
Yeah, we acknowledge that for many customers going through that building journey, it's the first time that they've built a home. They might have someone like me that was lucky enough to build in 2019 who had the 6 or 7 month build time, and they're being told it's 11 months, and it's really hard to understand why if you're going through that for the first time.
What's even harder when they say 11, it ends up being 18.
It is, yeah. There's a lot of education. Builders are working really hard to make sure that consumers are up to date with communication. The portals that exist now to keep people across what's happening on their side are evolving, and that customer experience is a real focus at the moment, but probably doesn't stop everyone driving to their site once a week just to check out what's going on.
Well, it doesn't. It's the most exciting thing in your life when it's happening.
Absolutely. And I think we're starting to see some more of those positive stories come out in industry, and those people that are getting their keys in a more acceptable timeframes, but certainly acknowledge that there's been plenty that haven't had that experience over the last couple of years.
Now, we know it is in the best interest of builders to get it done quicker, because the one risk they can't control, which has led so many builders to crumble, is market risk. The longer the build is happening, the more exposed the builder is to their tradie coming back to them and saying, nah, now I'm $3 a brick rather than $2 a brick, and now you're going to have to pay me more, and there goes your margin, there goes your margin. And then you extrapolate that across 200 builds, and now you're a few $1 million in the hole with an obligation to pay that money or go broke. Is it surprising to you that it is still happening to some of our most awarded builders in the last couple of months?
It's certainly been a really challenging time for a lot of those people that have received a huge number of awards from people like HIA over the last 5 to 15 years.
It doesn't discriminate, does it?
It doesn't. And I think there's so many things that can go into a reason why a builder gets in trouble. Some of them might be personal, some of them might be business related, some of them might be for reasons totally outside the building and the company's control. In some instances, it's challenging that they all get thrown in there together, but it's a really challenging industry, and the way that the financial models of a builder are set up to be able to manage that cash flow through the course of a build is really challenging. And if you're going through it for the first time or the 15th time, you need to be really aware of what's going on and what some of those precursor conditions could be that you might encounter over the course of a build, not only in a 7 or 8 month period, but in an 18-month period as well.
It's just as concerning and challenging for the client at the end of the day, who's sitting there with their whole life on hold at the behest of a company who may or may not want to fall on their sword. You look at your niche livings, your inspired livings, these are the guys who really took it to the edge of acceptability and way past it, holding people's lives up for years, not falling on their sword. These companies are ones that clearly have done the wrong thing, in my opinion, by their clients, because it holds up their ability to get insurance and move forward with their life. But you've seen articles in the paper where you've had, for example, a lady who started 4 years ago with a company, got stuffed around for most of that time, and then moved to another company that then went broke again, and 4 years down the track she's still sitting there with a slab and now a build cost that's gone from one price to another that would not even be covered by the indemnity insurance anymore. I mean, what do you do when you're in that situation as a consumer?
I think it's really challenging, and there is a home indemnity process in there that's designed to protect consumers, but I think we've stress tested the system over the last 3 or 5 years and found some obvious issues that exist within the process, where as an industry we don't want to see people go through that process. I think we all would like to see some of those situations come to a resolution far faster than we've seen over the course of the last couple of years. We're working with government at the moment as to what that could look like in the future.
There has to be a stepping clause, doesn't there, from some sort of agency so that this can't happen again, so that niche living can't hold people's lives up for 4 years because they don't want to fall on their sword.
Yeah, I think the building commissioner unfortunately hasn't had the power in the current environment
that has
to be
to change,
able
doesn't it?
To do stuff, and I think everyone's actively looking at what more can be done to get to a quick resolution for both the builder and the consumer in that situation.
Now, one other factor that has increased costs over the last few years for Western Australians has been the changes to the NCC, the construction code, essentially, for those listening. And what it does is it tells builders the minimum standard to which they must build homes with regards to energy, insulation, constructability, all those sort of things, right? It seems like that code has been updated a lot of times in the last few years, and not in a way that has made things cheaper for the consumer.
Yeah, so the National Construction Code kicked off in Western Australia 1st of May 2025, the last couple of weeks.
Or the update to it.
The update to it. So that's when WA officially adopted it. It's become mandatory. We fought really hard 3 years ago when this was being talked about, it being implemented, to say now wasn't the time to be doing that, and that industry needed time to get over the COVID period before we talked about totally changing what was essentially one of the biggest changes that we've had in the construction code in a really long time. Other states went ahead and adopted it early, and I think it caused a lot of chaos in some of those areas with builders and the systems not being ready to implement it. So from a DUP perspective, the implementation of it has been somewhat seamless because we've had enough time to transition to it. But your average cost of a build's probably increased by about $10,000 as a result of increased energy efficiency measures, some of the changes in waterproofing, timber coating, and some of the tweaks that go around that. And I think from an industry point of view, now we look at it and say, okay, let's pause and take a deep breath. We build a pretty good quality house.
In a fairly low risk area for the most part.
In a fairly low risk area that is now very energy efficient. And I think if you were to put anyone who was struggling for shelter in one of those houses, they'd be pretty happy with it at the moment. So
I think the argument is that they would have been happy 5 years ago as well.
I think that argument's been run and done, won and lost. But I think you're 100% right. Our advocacy at the moment is that industry we talked earlier about certainty. That comes down to regulation as well. If you want people to get really good at building a house, you need to give them time to understand what they're doing and implement that and get really good at it before we go
time and cost, right?
Before we go changing things again. For every change that happens on a piece of paper, there's a communication that has to go out through supervisors and down to the trades about how this is going to be implemented and what the change is there for and why it's being done.
So how much is this change going to cost us per house?
Average $10,000 is what we're hearing from the builders at the moment.
And what does that give us? What do we get out of it?
It's interesting. I think from a value point of view, when you compare one house to the other,
there is no discernible difference.
There is no discernible difference. But obviously, from an energy efficiency point of view, there is some, I guess, long-term benefits in lower running costs to heating and cooling the house.
So we're paying for
more expensive glass. You're probably getting solar panels on most of your roofs in the new world. You're probably looking at reduction in gas in most of the homes, an increase in electrification. So there's a lot of, increasing insulation in the roofs and wall cavities.
Feels like the things that a lot of us are doing already or would do when we have money. Solar panels, for example. A lot of houses will get built without them, but invariably a lot of us will end up going and getting them when we can afford it. Might be a couple of years down the track. It stops the stumbling block of getting the house in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we've said now we just need to draw a line in the sand and have that pause, because people are going to have to decide what they're not going to have in a house, because you're going to have solar panels now to include. So whether that's overhead cabinetry, whether that's keeping a room really basic, because
there's a trade-off is what you're saying.
There's going to be trade-offs to be able to do that. We know there's valuation issues when we try and take bedrooms out of homes in areas. You're looking at those trade-offs as to how you're going to make those projects affordable in the current market.
We already know there's a planning code that has been pushing people to have less bedrooms and more trees. So obviously the construction code is going to make people make, I guess, those compromises, again, if it comes down to budget, and especially with these house and land packages fitting under certain thresholds that are being arbitrarily put, whether it's for the state first home buyers stamp duty threshold or it's the federal help to buy 5% scheme, which has just been increased to $850. I think that's going to help, to be frank, with a lot of these 400 square metre blocks that are $1,000 a square metre, 400,000 plus 450 for the build. You're under that threshold now, which is probably going to help another demand. But again, all it does is it allows prices to be more expensive.
I think that's the challenge, and we want more people to have access to housing. We understand that gap between social and affordable is as wide as it's ever been, and we need to find ways to be able to get people into the market. But
for me, it's an acceptance by the government that we aren't going to win the battle on cost, and so we should just increase the threshold so that people aren't homeless. But there has to be something on the other side of the equation to try and fight the cost side. Things like the tradie programs, the apprenticeship programs, new technologies in how we build things. Is anything happening in those spaces? Because obviously I've been covering a bit of that on the podcast the last couple of months with Mark D'Alessandro on robotic arm concrete construction, with Peter Forgione on granny flats. What's going on in your sphere to possibly help choice and speed and cost?
I think the government is looking at the supply side challenges as well as the demand side. Demand side's probably, in my opinion, more of an East Coast stimulus when they're looking at how to get more people into those markets. But I think as part of the federal election commitments, they've committed to a $50 million modern methods of construction facility in Victoria that will help, I guess, be a best-in-class facility to help people wrap their heads around what those new modern methods of construction are.
It's like an R&D facility.
Yeah. We've certainly seen an explosion in different types of methodologies in Perth since COVID, whether the initial steps been a brick veneer or a framing type product, the 3D printing, concrete printing, the developments that have happened in the modular housing space have been really expansive, and a modular house isn't just a donga anymore. There's some amazing stuff that some of our members are doing. And even the banks and the financial institutions now are recognising that they need to change some of their parameters to lend to it, and so that it opens the market to more people. The state government, as part of their election commitments, announced a $50 million program that was a series of grants and loans to those that were looking to innovate within the housing space.
So would that go to someone like your contact doing your robotic concrete arm, trying to get 10 of them in the state?
Yeah, so we're still waiting for what the frameworks are and how that's going to be distributed. But I think those types of projects that we're seeing, the timber projects that are popping up in Midland, container homes, all of those different types of things to improve the efficiency and the innovation within the industry and to be able to bring more housing options to market are what those programs are designed to see.
It has to be about just increasing the lanes on the highway, right? Because currently it's always been mainly by supply option, but also consumer preference, to be frank. The 2 or 3 lanes for bricks and bricklayers, and then maybe an emergency lane for steel and timber that gets used when there's not enough brickies.
Yep.
And that's been how the highway went. And then essentially the second you put too many cars on that freeway, they crash and everyone can't get through the tunnel. And I think we need to find a way to widen that freeway, to have a lane for modular, to have a lane for in the planning space for granny flats and auxiliaries, which has been allowed for. And then to really start building out a couple more lanes for automated construction.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great analogy because I don't believe there's one single thing that's going to fix it. Modular is we're seeing some great developments there, but we're not going to produce 20,000 modular homes.
And we don't want them in Perth either.
No.
We're going to want them in Witchcliffe and Southwest and Exmouth and places where it's culturally acceptable and preferred.
And the industrial land that you would need to produce those types of numbers is incredible. We don't lose a lot of days on site to weather and that impact that from a productivity point of view. All of those types and methodologies that we've talked about have certainly increased, and we've just put out a survey to our members to see what those percentages are, because you're right, up until COVID, 75 to 80% was double brick and everything else was fighting for the rest. So we're really interested to see what kind of numbers are going to come through.
Again, that comes down to consumer preference, but consumer preference will never change unless they get exposed to and normalised to other options.
Yeah, I think more builders now have a plan A, B and C to build a house rather than pre-COVID, which was plan A. I think those discussions are happening more regularly even in the project home market as to what a consumer might want. Our consumers are more educated than they ever have been. They've got access to more information than they've ever had, as we're starting to see more, as you say, granny flat product hit the market, modular product, and we're excited to see where the concrete and 3D printing market will go. We'll start to see more take up in those spaces.
We know we've been losing a lot of builders over the last few years. Have we been gaining many?
Yeah, we have. So there's about 500 that were granted a building licence in 2024, which is up on the previous years. We generally see when times are going quite well that you'll have a site supervisor or a tradie or someone who's been in the market for a while.
That's where they start, right?
See an opportunity to go out and start their own small business. What we're really keen to do now is to nurture those businesses through the first 5 years. They're the incredibly tough moments where you start with...
very chunky, right? You've got a couple of jobs with some money coming in at some point in the future and you're living off your savings.
Yeah, there's probably 6 months before you start to see a deposit come through by the time you start working with a couple of clients and start to see some of that money entering your bank account. So if you're doing a couple of those jobs, it's hard. It looks good for a little bit, but then it gets hard again as you start paying trades and you're waiting for those progress payments to come out. We've certainly lost a lot, whether that be through insolvency or just getting too hard and them closing the doors once they've finished their final project. And some of those have gone on to be supervisors at other companies or stayed within the industry as trades, and some of them have left the industry altogether. But we are starting to see people come back to the industry. We're seeing apprentice numbers up. We're seeing some good numbers in skilled migration enter the state. It's just about continual lift.
We know that some of the big builders have have gotten even bigger, like your home group, for example, is now the biggest in the state. We know that the ABN group continues to grow and take advantage of its opportunities in the house and the land development space, along with home group, to be frank. All of it from the massive hole left by BGC, debacle of the way they've run things since COVID. Is that company coming back to the fore in a big way or in any way in the future? Do we know what's happening with what was WA's biggest builder?
I think what we've seen is they've been really focused on completing the 4,000 jobs that they had on site, and it's our understanding that number is now down to a number that's far more manageable, and they're getting towards the end of that pipeline of work.
Are they open for business again yet? Because they did that notable thing of closing up shop and saying, we've got 3 years of work, leave us alone.
Yeah, no. So we haven't seen any indication that they're back in the market and looking to build that volume back up. We'll know more over the course of the next couple of months. But at this stage, there's no indication that they're looking to step back into the residential home market. As you said, the likes of Home Group, ABN and Summit are probably the ones that have taken on a large portion of that work.
You've seen other medium-sized brands like Levita, New Choice coming through too. These are just ones off the top of my head that were median brands that have really started to pick up a lot more volume.
Yeah, and I think the Delstrat Group's going really well, Scott Park Group and JWH.
Yep.
There's a core group there that have been around for a long time that have been able to absorb some of that volume. It's 20,000 homes now. We probably, if we really want to increase in delivering those homes, do those builders want to grow more?
Yeah, or do you need a couple of extras? Why would you? That's what I mean. That's probably where I'm going with it is, are these builders not already probably at a point where it's like, hey, we've got enough work. We don't want to be becoming a BGC in that space of overdoing it at such a high volume. So the question is, are there any jacks in the pack that are coming through that might start to really be the 25, 26, 27,000th homes being built rather than staying at the 50 to 100 homes a year space?
Yeah, I can't see it in the residential home market. I think there's the slow growth there, but I reckon all of those businesses that we've talked about have found that band where you consistently run, and we talk a lot about it around our executive tables. We want to build as many homes as we can, but we want to run sustainable companies.
Yeah, without going broke.
And that needs to be the first priority. Those companies have found a position where their company structures allow them to build a certain number of homes. The medium to high density space is probably the one that isn't working at the moment. And if we wanted to get 4,000 to 5,000 extra homes a year, perhaps that's the space that we need to be looking at. What are the workarounds? Because we're going to run into land challenges into the future, I think, if we need...
It has to be apartments.
Yep.
It has to be density, and that comes from planning, but it also comes from, I don't know where, to be honest, a couple of evangelical big money people putting their money where their mouth is and bankrolling a couple of brand new apartment construction businesses. Really, I would have thought that sustainable level should be 18 to 20,000 houses in the detached house space and 10,000 apartments a year. And we probably set then. And maybe that evangelical money needs to be the state government. Maybe the state government needs to pick up, as it's alluding to now, the old state housing development board, development company, and instead of them being detached house builders, they are loss-making apartment builders.
I think there's a number of projects coming through under the Housing Australia Future Fund. Minister Carey was out announcing in the last couple of weeks 1,000 apartments that they're looking to build over the next 12 to 18 months. We need to build up that expertise that we've lost over the course of the last 3 or 4 years.
It's not just the government, is it? They need the builders. No. But the builders, and I've seen many of them go broke under government contracts, need to have some sort of surety that if they do the right thing, build these apartments at the cost that they're going to be, the government's not going to send them broke.
And I think there's been a lot of work done by muster builders around some of those reform packages for government contracts. I think the government now recognises they're a really important player in getting that market back up and running.
They were also, in my opinion, an important player in bankrupting a number of builders back in the day as well, which a lot of these people I knew, good people, and building disability homes, affordable homes, social homes, all sponsored by the government, held to account as costs rose and then sent broke. And if those builders were not sent broke, they'd still be building homes today, probably.
Yeah, I think whether it's a residential home builder or some of those big commercial builders that you're talking about, those contract terms need to be looked at. I think they probably worked for a large period of time pre-COVID, but COVID stress tests everything. And we need to find, hopefully we never go through that again, but if we do, we need to understand what the release valves are so that good people aren't impacted like the way we talked about.
All right, quick fire questions. Are we building enough homes right now?
For Western Australian homes, no.
Are we building to capacity?
Yes, we are building to capacity. We're continuing to build that capacity through apprenticeships and skilled migration, but it's a slow burn.
And is it realistic that we get to 26,000 homes a year this decade?
I think we'll probably, towards the end of the decade, get to 26,000 homes. But my asterisk and my caveat is the high-density market. I think, as you said,
It has to be the white knight.
It has to be. We can build 18,000 homes in the detached market, but then as soon as you go above that, you need to start thinking about schools, hospitals, other infrastructure that you're going to be requiring as the state gets bigger and wider and longer. So we can continue to build, I think, somewhere between 15 and 18,000 detached homes a year, and the land supply will be able to give us some options in that. But if we're trying to build 26,000 detached homes a year, we're in big trouble.
So we're at capacity. That capacity is not enough to meet our federal goals, and it's unlikely that we'll meet our federal goals unless something happens in the apartment space.
Yeah, this is incredibly complex because a lot of it is consumer driven as well. Do we have 6,000 people banging down the doors of our builders wanting to build at the moment if they could? Probably not. We need to continue to look at efficiency and affordability and some of those other things to be able to stimulate that market as well.
Those would be the factors. I think if we could make it quicker and cheaper and people could trust that what they ask for is what they're going to get when they have been told they were going to get it, a lot of people would probably be very happy to build a brand new home and be a part of that solution, but also have a nice new castle for themselves as well.
Yeah. I would stress that the industry is at a point now where it's in the best position that it's been in over the last 5 years. Those that are currently operating have emerged through some of the most challenging times that they've had. Because we are building capacity, there is momentum on site, and we're starting to see some really positive stories emerge. For those that are interested in thinking about building a new home, I think they should be starting to talk to builders, understand that it can be daunting, but there's plenty of resources out there and reviews to go and get a sense of who you might want to build with. But I think things are looking positive in that space as much as they have over the last couple of years.
Mike McGowan from the HIA, thank you very much for coming in, mate. It's been very insightful having this conversation, and I love the honesty and the candid nature of where we are genuinely at in the market. We're not there yet. We don't have all the solutions yet, but we're trying.
100%. Thanks for having me on. It's been great to be with you.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!